Do you know what to do with your triggers? Think about that for a moment. Maybe you intellectually know what you're supposed to do with your triggers, but when they actually happen, the emotional charge that happens impacts you in a negative way. This week, I was triggered over and over and over again. It is coming up on the anniversary of my son's death, Reggie, and this is always a hard time, anniversaries and things like that. And so I was trying to prepare, but then I realized it's been 9 years since Reggie's death, and he died at 17. And he has been gone almost as long as he was sick. And so just the magnitude of that was a trigger, right? And then I had a series of medical appointments. And in these medical appointments, I'm never quite healthy, right? It's like this time where you go before someone and they have to tell you all the things that are wrong with you, right? And they were both physical and mental health appointments. And so that was a trigger for me. I was also working through kind of trying to let go of some of the hustle. Ever since my children have passed, I have been on a mission and a hustle to make Mentally Strong important to others. And I just kind of had an emotional revelation that I needed to let some of that hustle go. So you can see that the triggers building here. And then the final thing was someone that I love dearly had some medical appointments that revealed possibly life-threatening problems. And it just hit me very deeply, right? And so that's the external trigger, right? But obviously it triggers my grief. So my name's Dr. B. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I teach mental strength. But I don't just teach it from that professional stance. I've lost 3 children and my husband over the course of 20 years. I understand grief and trauma, and I try to teach how to actually be mentally strong in the midst of the realities of life. And so we all have triggers. What are triggers? Triggers are external things that are triggering an emotional response inside of you. And sometimes, as a psych nurse practitioner, people will come to me and they will begin to list these external things that are causing their depression or anxiety. Those are just the triggers. Those are the stressors. Those are the things in the outside world that are weighing on you as a person, where you are psychologically, spiritually, and if we don't know how to identify and work through these triggers, then they just have this negative impact on us. And I've been working on myself and self-development for many years, and I have to confess that yesterday it all came tumbling down. And it's important for me to be vulnerable and honest as I teach these things of what do you actually do with your triggers. So for me, I try to present to everyone around me of having it together, mentally strong. And I really am mentally strong. But sometimes I'm hurting on the outside and I have to keep it strong. Or I feel like I have to keep it strong. And that's what happened yesterday. And because I pushed myself past my limit, I actually had what I call an episode losing it, right? And I want you to stop and think, because losing it is different for everybody. Sometimes it's, falling apart and crying. Sometimes it's anger outbursts. Sometimes it's drinking too much. For me, it was actually like a disassociative episode. I had a period of time where I kind of was outside of myself. And that is a known trauma response. And so if that's your losing it, that is more of a professional thing that you should talk to a professional about, right? But I had this episode, and whatever your losing it is, I just want you to think about that for a moment. And how do you pull yourself back together is super important. Not that you do lose it sometimes, because we all get overwhelmed. We all get to points where the triggers, the things that are happening in our life feel like they're too much. And so in that moment, I had to, kind of wrap my brain around what was going on. And I do that through the Mentally Strong method and this concept of thinking, organizing, and choosing. And I often teach it in that sequence, right? Knowing how to efficiently think through your problems, organize them, and make choices in line with what you want. But if you are feeling overwhelmed and the triggers in your life are just hitting and you are feeling the negative impact and the emotional response and you don't know what to do with that, I often say with triggers, we need to identify what they are triggering, right? Because what they are triggering is actually inside of us, okay? And so giving the example of my loved one who had this doctor's appointment that was lots of negative information, right? What did that trigger for me, right? So this was an external trigger, fear, right? So that's anxiety. What do we do with our anxiety, right? And it's a normal fear, right? Like the fear of something bad happening is real. And so to say, don't be anxious would not be fair, right? So a little bit of anxiety in that kind of situation is important, right? It helps us make good decisions and make sure that we are surrounding that situation with, wisdom and care, right? But when it becomes overwhelming, it interferes with everything else. So what's underneath that anxiety? Well, obviously my own grief, right? Like, we cannot lose another person in this family. We've lost too much. And we just can't. And I remember very distinctly when, after Reggie died and Maya was alive and well and her seizures were well controlled, I was like, there's no way God would take another one of my children. And 5 years later, Maya dies. And so to try to believe that nothing bad could happen. So you see how this external trigger created a whirlwind of emotion of all of the things that I've been through, that we've been through as a family. And so that is grief and trauma. And so when we're trying to organize the triggers in our life, putting them into categories so that we can make choices that are small enough to believe in, that they give us strength in the moment, because it feels like chaos in the brain when there's multiple things going on and there's an overwhelm. I wish I could say that there was 3 easy steps and that if you just think, organize, choose, it'll all be fine. And this is one of my frustrations in the self-development world. They say, well, if you just think positive, if you just do this. But the reality is I've lost children. And even though it's been many years since Johnny's death, almost 9 years since Reggie's death, and 4 years since Maya's death, that grief will be raw for me for the rest of my life. And that's okay. I teach a lot about separating the grief and the trauma and acknowledging the pain of grief. And it is okay for me to feel that pain. But it's not okay for me to push myself to the limit and have what I call an episode. So, as we're learning to organize what is that chaos going on in our brain, we also need to stop and think, what is the thing right before, right? Like, should I have taken a day off of work? Should I have, were there things that I could have done to protect myself from going over that edge? And it doesn't happen to me very often. So, I'm a push through, a fixer. And so I thought I could do it, right? But it was a teaching or a learning moment for me. Taking care of myself is a lifetime journey, and it is a lifetime journey for you as well. So what are the triggers in your life right now? What's coming at you? And when you think about organizing that, is there grief there? Is there fear? And remember, fear can be normal. If somebody tells you don't be anxious, they either are not, being authentic with what, real life is, or they don't understand how that works, right? So you take that anxiety and you try to decrease it to a productive stance. So for example, this loved one who is going through something right now, right? Like, can I help at the doctor's appointments? Can I help with the choices for treatment plans? Can I help with, life choices for that person, right? Like, it's not just about me and how it's triggering me. It's, can I manage that anxiety to be more helpful, right? Because if you have mild anxiety, you can be productive and helpful. So that's the first step in that. But then also, acknowledging that that's my grief that I'm pouring out onto this young person, and that's not fair to them, right? And so taking my grief back and saying, okay, I'm going to spend some extra time doing, what I call controlled grief, and I'm going to work through that grief, acknowledge what part is the trauma. But here's the kicker. The negative dialogue that often happens from these triggers is you have complete control of. And so I can share my negative dialogue, right? Like, I worked really hard to save my children. I did all of the right things, and it didn't work. They died anyway, right? And so that immediate negative dialogue goes to, what if I'm not going to be helpful? And what if, there's nothing that can be done or whatever? Like, there's this negative dialogue that you have control of, and you have to stop. Stop. And how can I reframe that? I've done a lot of spiritual work, and I know that Reggie and Maya's and Johnny's purpose and my husband Bundy's purpose have been fulfilled. Like, what I've gone through was part of this bigger soul purpose. But I have to remind myself of those things, right? Because I'm still living in this world, in this reality, and the negative dialogue comes back. And so making sure that you're separating that from your grief and your trauma. Because it is okay for me to grieve the loss of my children forever. But it's not okay for me to beat myself up over the loss of my children. That is not okay. And so as you're learning to organize what's triggering you underneath, right? Because we often focus on, oh my gosh, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. And we're just fueling the fire and using a lot of energy. And the weight of that is what we feel, that overwhelm, that anxiety, and sometimes even depression. So as we learn to organize those things, we can make the little choices. I can choose to spend a little more time in grief. I can definitely choose to change that dialogue and that narrative. And I can choose to be an active participant in the success of my loved one's journey, right? I can choose that. But I even get choked up saying that because it's like, but what if I get hurt again? But it's not about me. So, it's a heavy one. But I just want to be real with triggers are always going to happen. But if we can look at what's underneath, organize that. And oftentimes it actually goes to a core connection. And core connections started in your childhood. I believe, or I struggle with, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. And that comes up, right? Well, what if I'm not smart enough to help this person? Or I'm not worthy of blessings poured out on me. But those are my core connections, and I've worked through them a lot, but they still come up. And being able to quickly know, okay, that's pushing one of my really deep core buttons, but it's not true. I am as smart as I need to be. I am worthy, all of those things, and continuing to tell myself that. So as you're finishing up this video, I want you to think about separating the triggers, the external things that you could probably list, lots of them. What are they actually pushing? What is that emotional reaction internally for you? And I teach the Mentally Strong method. It helps with really getting those, being able to think through what that is and being able to then identify, what are the different categories that I need to organize so that you can make choices. Yes, we need to think positive. But that only helps the, negative self-talk. There's so much more work that we can do for ourselves to be mentally strong. Continue watching. Click the link, get the Think Organized Choose worksheet. It shows all the different categories that we work through. Subscribe to the channel and continue on your journey to be mentally strong.